Have you ever seen an animal depressed or in despair, just having a bad day, or today he just decides to be a little bit lethargic, doesn't decide to, he's just not in the mood to get up and go to work today? What happens that it's only applicable by people, all these types of hargashas, and suddenly by animals, you never find it. Day in and day out, keeping to their same activity no matter what situation they're in. So the answer is a very interesting historical piece, which you should know, and that is that there was a person who was working on the railroad tracks in the middle of the 1800s by the name of Gage. And while he was working, an iron rod went in through his cheek from one side and came up through his frontal lobe of his brain, mamish through his head to the frontal lobe up his head. There was a large iron rod that went in there. And he was taken kind of quickly to the hospital. He was completely cognitive. He was around. He didn't lose consciousness, nothing. When he went to the hospital, they kind of extracted it using whatever capabilities they had in the middle of the 1800s. And guess what? This Mr. Gage was perfectly fine. From here, they were nimnu vergamru. They concluded that it seems to be the frontal part of one's brain, what's known as the frontal lobe, is not relevant. It's not something that is very useless. It's useful. That is not something that is very useless. However, in the 30s, they were investigating into this idea a little bit more, and they didn't just discover that it's not necessary, it's just neutral. They realized that the frontal lobe and the brain only causes nezek, it only causes problem. It leads to depression, it leads to self-esteem issues, it leads to people just becoming out of it, or maybe even suicidal tendencies sometimes. It comes as a result of the frontal lobe, and they started something known as a frontal lobotomy, where they actually would remove the front of someone's brain in order that it could remove him from having some type of nezek like that, in order that he should live a happy-go-lucky life. Well, guess what? These frontal lobotomies are not practiced anymore, and they're even illegal. And part of the reason why is because approximately 40 years ago, in the middle of the 80s, when someone was in a very serious accident and was also in a frontal lobe, had some severely injured in his frontal lobe of his brain, and this happened a number of times. They did many, many tests, and they noticed something else. They noticed that such people had a very big difficulty in what's known as dual planning, which means, let's say, playing a game of chess or a puzzle or a maze, doing certain activities which require a little bit of thinking ahead or thinking of what the next step is. Chess, of course, being a classic of that. So you know what? They were not wrong in the 30s. They were accurate. But you know what they were missing out? Is that hafuch, when a person thinks ahead, when he has a focus and he knows what's in the next step, that's the way that a person gets up and does something. But it's also the way that a person can get depressed, he become lethargic or very upset or very suicidal when he feels that he's not being as active, when he doesn't have those goals, when he doesn't feel accomplished, when he feels stressed out. So the frontal lobe of a person's brain separates between him and the animal. Because we have, as we see, a forehead on our head. Some of our foreheads are bigger than others. It depends how receding your hairline is. And that front padachet, what we call the forehead, is the frontal lobe, which animals don't have, except for monkeys. And that is a position, that's the idea of being able to think ahead, being able to see ahead, plan ahead, not live for the here and now, but also to focus on what's coming and what's the next. And with this, like we said, it's dangerous, it makes us human, it can lead people to becoming extremely depressed or even dangerous. However, at the same time, this is what lives life. This is what gets us up in the morning. This is what keeps us active. And when a person loses that, oy vey, it's a little bit of danger. And this idea is very important to remember, because the more a person is static, the more he sees his life ebbing away. The more a person is active and he works with activity, so that is the way to remove all type of depression, of being upset, of suicidal tendencies, or all these types of ideas which we are unfortunately too familiar with in our day and age. The more a person is inanimate and frozen, person, the more he is dead, so to speak. The more he acts in a very dead type of way, and that's why lo aleinu, it's dangerous. But when a person goes to pension, and I notice this all the time, there are two types of people that go to pension. The person who knows and is not connected at all to what we call Torah or Torah ideas. So, and they go to pension, they basically have nothing else to live for, and you have all the money, you're good. But what are you waking up in the morning for? Especially people who are not busy with tefillah, at least going to daven, or they're not there's nothing else to live for. So Seder, you try to go on a vacation here and there, but eventually things become what we call stale. And that's why it's an extremely dangerous state when people go to complete pension and don't have that. As opposed to when you see people who were learning before and they know how to open a blat gemara, or they know how to connect with a chavruta or go to a shir or things like that. They are a different life. They're living the lifestyle. They are just so happy with what they are. They never die. They're always awake. Rav Goldstein, who was a Rav here in Ramat Beit Shemesh, he was a neighbor. His father, Rav Tuvia Goldstein, and when he was a young boy, he was a neighbor with the great Rav Moshe Feinstein on FDR Drive. He lived right underneath him. And he said he remembers one day walking into the building with his father, and he saw a line of old people from the old age home that were counting license plate numbers, and they were looking and checking, here's number 1, here's number 2, and this. That's what they were doing. And his father turned to him and said, see what these guys are doing? That's what old people do when they are at the elderly retirement age. But up 2 floors over here, there's someone who's in his mid-80s, and he's still writing tshuvot to the whole world, and he's writing bombas, he's writing ptzatzot, he's writing bombs that are still going to the whole entire world. He's yomim v'layla busy till the day he dies. Of course, the great Rav Moshe Feinstein. And that separates between all of us. It's an incredible idea to think about. But a person has to watch out. Alexander the Great, to go lehavdil, if I could say, as we all know, was a Talmud of Aristotle. He was a student of Aristotle, but he decided to go out and conquer the world, and he succeeded. But as the legend says, that when he finally got to India, and he was able to succeed in destroying and conquering India, he annexed it into the rest of the Greek Empire. However, when he was in his own quiet room, somebody was there witness to Alexander the Great crying emphatically. He was incredibly crying, and he was wondering, why? You have conquered the known world. It is all yours. He said, yes, but now what? He basically was depressed. I have nowhere else to do. I have nothing else to do. I finished. Game over. He already accomplished everything. The south, the north, the east, the west was all his, and he had nowhere to go, and he was very depressed. And you know what? Soon afterwards, he actually died. People don't know how he died so soon afterwards. Whatever the reasons are, but this seems to be very connected to this story, that when he had nothing else to live for, he died at a very young age. He didn't even make it to the age of 40 years old. On a similar story I read once about a group of people that went up to Mount Everest. And yes, there were people that died on the way up. There was a group that went up, and 1 or 2 died on the way up. One successfully came down. One guy who almost died on the mountain, he actually came down. But he reported a couple of those people, after going up there, someone else, a couple years later, actually committed suicide. And they were trying to figure out what happened. The man just accomplished one of the most incredible accomplishments that man can commit, the highest mountain on the planet. And he realized that he spent his whole life mountain climbing. He went from this mountain, until he was able to conquer the Everest. And then, now what? Now what? I have nowhere else to go from here. He had no more meaning in his life. And that's the idea of always needing to have that next step. Always needing to have that drive to go to somewhere else. I one time heard an interesting ha'ara, an interesting idea, that on the ladder it always says never step on the last step. Don't step on the last step. So the question was asked, so why do you have the last step? What's the purpose of the last step there? If anyways you can't step on it, so ditch it. Get rid of it. So the answer I heard was because always the last step is the step you can't step on. You're never allowed to go to the step. So it doesn't matter. You always have to have that last step which you can't step on. You understand? Which means that you can never step on the last step. You can't go to the end. You always have to have those new goals. Papers should never be done. It's always important that, yes, we have our goals and we finish them, but the goals should never be done. I know we're always looking to finish and say, nothing else on the list. But you know what? Nothing else on the list The only real people who have nothing else on the lists are the ones who are in the cemetery. That's really, in the end of the day, what's true. If you want to be living life and you want something to be happening, it means you're on the move and you're moving and you're active and you're looking for new goals and you're always trying to do a new chesed or a new piece of Torah, a new chavruta, a new activity. What can I do to help someone else out, etc., etc. That is really what lives life, and that's what makes life, and that is all what's connected to Pesach. And with that we finished, because Pesach is an incredible holiday, because matzah and chametz are exactly the same thing. They're both made of water and flour. It's just a matter of time. All that matters is how much time you put into it, because the more time you put into it, the more physical it is. Time is a fourth dimension. That's what Einstein taught us. We always know there is place and there's height and there's length and width, but time is another dimension. One can officially go back in time if you can go the speed of light. Time is a fourth dimension. The more above you go from unnecessary time, get rid of time which makes you heavy, go above time. What we say, go bechipazon. We left Mitzrayim bechipazon. With zealotness, with a quickness. We left as quick as possible. We went out with a certain chipazon, with a quickness in order to go out, because we wanted to go above time. With a stealthfulness in order to go above time. And therefore the matzah also is the same as bread, but without the extra time. No extras on the agenda. The letters chametz and matzah, if you pay attention, are the same letters. The mem and tzadi are the same letters. The only difference is a hey in matzah and chet in chametz. The difference between a hey and a chet is a little dot. It's a little bit of ink. It's not very much difference. Meaning the whole difference between the word matzah and chametz, pay attention to the letters, is a drop of ink. Because there's very minimal amount of differences between them. It's all a matter of a little bit of speed of time, of an unnecessary amount. We were on 40, it's such an interesting thing. We're on 49 levels of Tumah, we just made it. It's like sliding into home in the last second. In the ninth inning, you go ahead and you slit the home and you made the home, you just made it into home in the last minute to be able to make it. You were the last runner, last batter. Oh, why do it have to be dafka the 49th? Why couldn't it be 48th? Because the idea is that it had to be on the edge. We were mamish just a little bit more, and we had to run out. We had to leave as fast as possible. That zealotness is what brings us to activity. That's what brings us to life, and that's what makes us Jewish. That's why we eat sli esh. We don't eat it nowadays, but in the time of the Beit HaMikdash, you have something tzalui. The Korban Pesach was tzalui. It was fried, because that's something that goes quick. It's the way it goes much faster. No unnecessary mediums of water to cook. Go ahead, chick-chack, fry it up. Let's get it out fast. The whole idea of the Chag is something of moving, activity, life, vigor, exasperation, living life, and moving, because that's how we were born. When we give birth to a beautiful nation known as the Jewish nation, we were a little child who is impregnated inside of a Mitzrayim, inside of Egypt. We are a goy, the care of goy. We are now being given birth to. It happens chick-chack, fast. When a woman gives birth, when it comes out fast. It doesn't last. And when the times that the late is happening, it's got to move. It's got to come quickly. And that's what we were doing also. We were coming out bechipazon, because we were teaching us a lesson for life and a lesson for all generations. No staying stagnant. We are never on pension. We're never scribbling out all our goals. Our goals are always there. Our intentions are always there. And we're always moving to the next step. And that is how we lead to our greatness. Chag Sameach.